Hi guys, tonight we're drifting back to the very first mystery of cheese, long before neat wedges, golden wheels, or little cubes on a party tray ever existed. Imagine warm milk sloshing in a leather pouch, a tired herder crossing a dry hillside, goats muttering nearby as if they already know the punchline. The air smells of dust, grass, smoke, and animal warmth. Somewhere in this ordinary day, milk quietly changes, it thickens, it separates. It becomes something strange, sour, useful, and, against all odds, delicious. Was cheese invented on purpose, or did humanity simply trip over it while trying not to waste breakfast? Very dignified, really. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what your local time is. It is always lovely to imagine this story spreading across bedrooms, sofas, and late-night kitchens around the world. Now, dim the lights. You are walking beside animals in a world that has only recently learned how to live with them. The land around you is not silent, but it is gentle. Hooves press into dry soil. A bell taps softly against a goat's neck. Wind combs through coarse grass and carries the warm, musky smell of sheep, dung smoke, and the faint sweetness of fresh milk. Your hands are rough from work. Your clothing scratches a little at the shoulders. Everything you own has to be useful, because nothing in this world arrives easily. You live in a time when people are changing their relationship with food. For many thousands of years, humans have hunted, gathered, fished, followed seasons, and learned landscapes like a memory palace. Now, in several parts of the world, some communities are keeping animals close. Sheep, goats, and cattle are not just passing creatures in the distance. They are companions, property, responsibility, and occasionally, absolute chaos with horns. You learn their moods. You know which goat will kick the pail. You know which ewe will wander away for no reason except, perhaps, to make your evening more dramatic. Milk is one of the great surprises of this new life. It comes from a living animal, warm and pale, carrying fat, protein, and sugar. It is nourishing, but it is also terribly fragile. In a world without refrigerators, fresh milk does not stay fresh for long. Leave it in the heat, and it turns sour. Let dust enter it and it spoils. Carry it too far and it becomes something else before you reach camp. You do not yet know the words bacteria, enzymes, lactose, or fermentation. You only know what your senses tell you. Sweet milk becomes sharp. Liquid becomes lumpy. Some changes are dangerous. Some are useful. And the trick, as always, is learning which is which. A common story says that cheese may have been discovered when milk was carried in a pouch made from an animal's stomach. Inside that pouch, natural enzymes could have acted on the milk, turning it into curds and whey. It is a tidy tale, almost too tidy, with a wandering traveller opening the skin bag and finding the world's first snack. Historians and food scholars are cautious with it, because ancient accidents rarely leave neat witnesses behind. Still, the idea makes sense. Stomachs contain rennet, and rennet helps milk coagulate. So as you walk under a wide sky, feeling the weight of a skin bag against your hip, you can imagine the surprise. You expected a drink. You found soft curds floating in yellowish liquid, not glamorous, not plated with figs, just weird milk with ambition. At first you might hesitate. The smell is tangy. Alive, not rotten exactly, but different. You touch the curd with cautious fingers. It is cool where the pouch has shaded it, soft and trembling, like something halfway between food and mistake. You taste a little. It is sour, creamy, and filling. Your face probably does not express culinary enlightenment. More likely, it says, well, this did not kill me immediately. And that is how many ancient food discoveries begin, with hunger, suspicion, and a brave nibble, Cheese matters because it solves several old problems at once. Milk spoils quickly, but curds can last longer. Milk is awkward to transport, but pressed curds are easier to carry. Milk contains lactose, which many adults in early farming populations may have had difficulty digesting. But fermenting and separating milk can reduce that burden. So cheese is not merely a treat. It is technology. It is storage. It is survival wrapped in softness. It lets people turn a brief abundance into something that can travel through time. Archaeologists have found evidence that humans were processing milk thousands of years ago, including traces of dairy fats absorbed into ancient pottery. Some of the earliest strong evidence for cheesemaking comes from Neolithic Europe, where perforated pottery vessels may have served as strainers for separating curds from whey. You can picture such a vessel in your hands, clay-cooled and slightly gritty, dotted with small holes. Whey drips through it with soft, patient taps into a bowl below. The sound is quiet, but in the history of food, it is thunder wearing slippers. You stand near a hearth as the evening settles. Smoke leans low beneath a simple shelter. Someone warms milk in a clay pot, careful not to scorch it. Someone else adds a sour starter from yesterday's milk, because yesterday, being useful for once, has decided to help today. The milk thickens slowly. Nobody calls this science, but it is science all the same. Observation becomes habit. Habit becomes craft. Craft becomes tradition. A child watches, not with a notebook, but with wide eyes and sticky fingers. That child will remember the smell, the timing, the feel of curd when it breaks properly. In this way, knowledge moves quietly through families. The earliest cheeses are probably nothing like the polished supermarket varieties you know. They are fresh, soft, white, or cream-coloured, and eaten quickly. Some may be salted when salt is available. Some may be dried in the sun. Some may be pressed under stones. Their taste depends on the animal, the pasture, the vessel, the weather, and the invisible life in the milk. Every batch is local because everything is local. A valley has its own flavour. A hillside has its own season. Even the animal's mood seems, to the tired herder at least, like it might be involved. This is the beginning of terroir, though nobody says terroir yet, which is probably for the best at bedtime. There is also something intimate about cheese. Bread can be shared from grain. Meat can come from the hunt or the herd. Fruit can be gathered, but milk links food to care, birth, and the daily rhythm of animals. To milk a goat or cow, you must be near it. You must return morning and evening. You must keep the animal alive, fed, protected, and calm enough to cooperate. Cheese is not just preserved milk. It is preserved relationship. You taste pasture, labour, weather, and trust, with just a little barnyard attitude. Across early farming communities, people would have learned different methods. In warm climates, milk might sour quickly, encouraging fresh acid-set curds. In cooler regions, storage possibilities widen. Where salt is accessible, cheese can become firmer and safer. Where people use woven baskets, cloth, skins, or pottery, the texture changes. Every container teaches a different lesson. A reed basket leaves marks. A cloth drains gently. A clay pot holds coolness. An animal skin contributes its own microbial signature, which sounds rather elegant until you remember it is basically a bag made from a former creature. Ancient food history is beautiful, but it does enjoy reminding you not to be too fancy. Researchers still argue whether cheese first emerged mainly as a deliberate technique, a repeated accident, or a gradual set of milk-handling habits that only later became recognizable as cheesemaking. The difficulty is that soft-off foods vanish. Pots survive. Bones survive. Stone tools survive. A tender curd from 8,000 years ago does not politely wait around to be interviewed. So scholars read the stains inside pottery, the patterns of animal bones, the chemistry of ancient fats, and the spread of dairying cultures. The result is not one simple birthplace, but a misty horizon of experiments. Cheese may not have a single dramatic birthday. It may have many small mornings. You can feel that uncertainty as part of the charm. The beginning of cheese is not a royal decree or a famous battle. Nobody stands on a hill announcing, "Behold, I have invented cheddar." Instead, you have people trying to keep milk from going bad. You have mothers feeding children, herders walking long distances, elders remembering what worked last summer, and impatient stomachs encouraging innovation. The ancient kitchen is not a laboratory with clean counters. It is smoke, flies, cracked bowls, warm hands, hungry voices, and someone saying, perhaps, "Do not throw that away yet." The animals graze nearby as dusk deepens. Their breath steams faintly in cooler air. A dog circles the edge of the camp. The sky turns purple, then blue-black, and the first stars appear, indifferent but pretty. You sit with a small piece of fresh curd in your palm. It feels fragile, damp, almost alive. When you eat it, the flavour is simple, but it lingers. Sourness wakes the tongue. Fat softens it. Salt, if there is any, makes it brighter. Your body understands before your mind does. This food will matter. It will matter because it can be carried. It will matter because it can feed people when milk is no longer fresh. It will matter because it can turn grass, which humans cannot digest, into nourishment through animals, then preserve that nourishment in a compact form. It will matter because it belongs to ordinary people. Cheese is not born in palaces. It begins among herds, shelters, clay vessels, smoky fires, and hands that smell faintly of milk no matter how often they are rinsed. As night lowers around you, the camp grows quieter. The sharp little sounds of work fade into breathing, shifting wool, settling embers. Somewhere nearby, whey drips one last time from a strainer. It is a tiny sound, nearly nothing, yet inside it is a whole human habit forming, the habit of noticing transformation and keeping it. Milk becomes curd, curds become food, food becomes memory, and in that soft, sour beginning, cheese takes its first steps into history, not with a trumpet, thank goodness, but with a gentle drip, a warm animal and a sleepy human deciding that tomorrow, perhaps, they will make it again. You're standing where rivers make civilization feel possible. The air is damp near the banks, heavy with mud, reeds, cattle breath, and smoke from low ovens. In the distance, water moves with a slow brown shine, carrying silt, fish, broken twigs, and the hopes of people who have learned that a river can be both generous and extremely moody. Fields stretch outward in careful lines. Barley bends under the sun. Date palms lift their ragged crowns. Somewhere, a donkey complains with the moral certainty of a retired judge. Here, food is no longer only a household matter. It is counted, stored, taxed, offered, traded, and written down. That is one of the quiet changes that transforms cheese from a clever farm food into a visible part of civilization. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates, people developed cities where clay tablets hold records of grain, beer, sheep, goats, oil, labour, and dairy products. A scribe presses a reed stylus to wet clay, making neat little wedge-shaped marks. His hands smell faintly of earth. His job is not romantic, but it is powerful. If something is worth recording, it has entered the world of administration. Cheese, or at least milk products very close to it, belongs there. You walk through a courtyard where women and men work in the heat of morning. A clay jar rests in the shade, its surface cool when you touch it. Milk has been strained, soured, stirred, poured, and perhaps salted. You hear the slap of wet cloth, the creak of baskets, the soft clink of pottery. Flies make lazy circles. Children hover near the work, hoping for a taste, or at least an accident in their favour. The smell is rich and complicated warm milk, sour curd, river mud, straw, sweat, and smoke. Nothing about it is delicate, yet it is not unpleasant. It is the scent of a food system working hard. In Mesopotamian life, dairy came from animals suited to human use, cows in some places, goats and sheep in others, depending on landscape, wealth, and need. Milk could become butter-like fats, fermented drinks, curds, and cheeses. The exact categories are difficult for modern people to untangle because ancient words do not always match modern supermarket labels. A tablet might list a dairy product, but that does not mean it was cheddar, feta, or anything that would politely sit on a cracker at a dinner party. Still, the basic idea is clear. People were managing milk, changing it, preserving it, and giving it social value. A mainstream historical fact rests gently in this scene. Sumerian and later Mesopotamian records include dairy products among temple and palace goods, showing that milk foods were part of organized economies. Temples were not only places of worship, they were also landholders, employers, storehouses, and distribution centers. So cheese could pass through religious and economic hands at the same time. It might feed workers, it might supply priests, it might be presented in offerings, it might be measured out as part of a ration. Sacred and practical were not enemies here. The divine, apparently, also appreciated a reliable dairy inventory. You can imagine a temple storeroom, thick-walled and dim. Light slips in through a doorway and falls across sealed jars. The air is cooler inside, dusty and still. A steward checks goods with patient suspicion, because humanity invented accounting and immediately invented reasons to distrust everyone involved. Clay ceilings are marked, baskets are stacked, and a worker waits while his ration is calculated. Grain, beer, oil, and dairy products keep bodies moving. Cheese is valuable not because it is rare luxury in every case, but because it is useful. It gives energy. It can be divided. It can travel farther than fresh milk. It can be stored, at least for a while. In a world where storage is a kind of magic, there is also a strange poetry in the fact that cheese appears in records built to prevent forgetting. Fresh curd vanishes quickly. A clay tablet lasts for thousands of years if baked by sun, fire, or accident. So the soft thing disappears, but the bureaucratic note survives. This is unfair, of course. The cheese did the delicious work, and the paperwork got immortality. History can be rude like that. Now your path turns toward the Nile, where another river teaches people to trust rhythm. Egypt opens around you in brightness. The sun is wide and white above the floodplain. Mud brick houses glow in the heat. The river smells of water plant, fish, wet clay, and life beginning again. Cattle stand with patient grandeur, flicking their tails. Goats nose at whatever they should not be eating. In courtyards and workshops, milk is handled with the same careful urgency. It must be used, changed, or shared quickly before the climate has its say. Egyptian tomb art shows scenes of cattle, milking, food preparation, and offerings, reminding you that dairy animals belong to the visual world of farming and abundance. In Egypt, food had more than one life. It fed the living, honoured the gods, and accompanied the dead. A tomb might contain bread, beer, meat, fruit, jars of oil, and sometimes evidence of dairy foods. The ancient Egyptian imagination of the afterlife was not a pale cloud of boredom. It was a continuation of needs and pleasures, with fields, feasts, servants, and supplies. A person hoped to be sustained forever, which is ambitious, but understandable. Eternity sounds easier with snacks. You enter a painted tomb chamber in your imagination. The air is dry and mineral, with a faint scent of dust, resin, and old stone. On the walls, figures move in timeless profile: farmers, cattle, vessels, offerings arranged in careful order. The colours are still warm in places: ochre, blue, green, black, cream. Food is pictured with reverence, not because every meal was grand, but because food meant order defeating chaos. Cheese, or preserved milk food, fits this world beautifully. It is controlled transformation. It is perishability made steadier. It is nature persuaded to stay useful a little longer. A remarkable piece of evidence comes from ancient Egypt, where archaeologists identified a very old, solid, cheese-like substance in a tomb at Saqqara, associated with a high-ranking official. Imagine opening a jar that has waited in darkness for more than 3,000 years. You do not want to taste it. Truly, please do not. Yet the survival of that material suggests how deeply dairy preservation had entered elite life. It was not just a rustic accident. It could belong among grave goods, status, and ritual. That small hardened mass is not appetizing now, but historically speaking, it has aged with confidence. Here is your quirky tidbit for the night. Some ancient dairy residues from Egypt have been discussed not only as cheese, but as possible health hazards, because animal milk could carry diseases if untreated. So, in the grand human tradition, the same jar might whisper both nourishment and mild biological menace. Ancient food was not always the wholesome golden dream people imagine. It was brilliant, adaptive, and sometimes very much a gamble. Bedtime history is cozy. Yes, but the microbes were absolutely working overtime. You watch workers make a fresh dairy food in the shade of a reed screen. Milk is poured into a wide vessel. A stirring agent or older fermented milk may be added. The liquid rests. The heat does part of the labour. Then the curd is gathered, drained through cloth or basketry, and pressed lightly. Whey runs pale and thin into a lower bowl. A worker sprinkles salt with practised fingers. Salt bites at the air. The curd firms slightly. No longer milk. Not yet the hard wheel that later ages will celebrate. It is simple, fresh, useful, and likely eaten with bread, onions, beer, fruit, or whatever the household has earned from the day. Cheese in these early civilizations is also tied to class. Some dairy products may be everyday foods for people close to herds, while others are controlled by institutions or reserved for offerings and elites. You feel that difference as you move from a rural yard to a palace kitchen. In the yard, food is immediate. In the palace, it becomes organized performance. Servants carry jars, scribes track deliveries, priests maintain rituals. The same curd that fills a worker's stomach can also sit among sacred provisions. It is humble and elevated at once, which is a very cheese-like thing to be. Historians still debate whether the dairy foods described in some Mesopotamian texts should be understood as true cheeses, strained yogurts, fermented milk solids, butter-related products, or categories that do not fit modern terms at all. This uncertainty matters because language preserves labels better than textures. The ancient word may point towards something thick, sour, salted, dried, or pressed. But you cannot lean close to a tablet and smell the difference. The tablet remains silent. The scholar sighs. The cheese, naturally, has left the building. Still, you can sense why it never disappears. Civilization creates new pressures, cities need supply chains, workers need rations, temples need offerings, elites need display, and households need to stretch food across hot days. Cheese answers quietly. It does not demand a throne. It simply sits in a jar, waits in a basket, or rides in a ration pack, making itself useful. There is something calming in that usefulness. It is not flashy. It is not heroic. It is food doing its job. The evening comes down along the river in Mesopotamia. The clay walls cool slowly after sunset. In Egypt, the Nile darkens and reflects the first stars. You hear frogs, distant voices, the cough of cattle settling near pens. A jar is sealed, a tablet is set aside to dry. A tomb painter washes colour from a brush. Somewhere, a worker tears bread and presses it into soft salty curd. Somewhere else, an offering table is arranged for a soul imagined to be hungry in eternity. You breathe in smoke, mud, milk, and night air. The world is larger now, fuller of cities, temples, record, and rituals, but the comfort remains close to the hand. A little preserved milk rests in a bowl. It carries the labour of animals, the skill of makers, the authority of scribes, and the quiet hope that food can last beyond the moment. Around you, rivers keep moving through darkness, patient and brown, while cheese settles deeper into human life, no longer merely a discovery, but a companion of civilization. You climb into the bright stony world of ancient Greece, where the hills are dry, the sea flashes blue between ridges, and goats seem to occupy every available slope with the calm arrogance of creatures who know they are historically important. The air smells of thyme, dust, olive wood smoke, and warm animal hides. Cicadas rasp in the heat like tiny instruments played by very determined fingers. Under your sandals, the ground is rough, pale, and sun-baked. Somewhere above you, a shepherd calls out, and his voice slips across the hillside, thin and clear. This is a land where cheese fits naturally into daily life. Greece is not one endless wheat field. Much of it is mountainous, broken, and better suited to hardy animals than broad grain farming. Sheep and goats thrive where cattle would grumble and reconsider their career choices. They climb, browse, survive dry summers, and turn scrubby plants into milk. Their milk becomes curds, and curds become food that can travel in a pouch, sit beside bread, or strengthen a body after labour. You're not looking at luxury alone. You're looking at adaptation. You pause beside a small farmstead built of stone and timber. A low wall keeps the animals close, though not necessarily quiet. Bells knock softly against necks. A kid bleats as if personally wronged by existence. Inside a shaded work area, milk rests in a clay vessel. The room is cool compared with the white glare outside. Your fingers brush a woven basket used for draining curds, and its reeds feel dry, slightly sharp, and worn smooth at the edges. The smell rising from the vessel is tangy, green, and faintly wild, shaped by grazing plants from the hills. The cheese made here is likely simple, fresh, and brined when salt allows. It may be soft enough to crumble, or firm enough to slice after pressing. Some is eaten quickly, some is stored in jars, some is carried to market. You see a woman lift curds with practiced hands, letting whey run between her fingers. She does not measure with modern precision. She knows by sight and touch. Too soft, and it needs more draining. Too dry, and it has been neglected. Cheesemaking depends on attention, and attention is a kind of quiet intelligence that history sometimes forgets to praise. A mainstream fact settles easily into this landscape. Ancient Greek literature treats cheese as a familiar food. In Homer's Odyssey, the Cyclops Polyphemus keeps sheep and goats and stores cheeses in his cave. You step into that famous imagined cave, not as a hero, thank goodness, but as a sleepy visitor with excellent boundaries. The air is cool, damp, and heavy with the smell of milk, wool, stone, and penned animals. Baskets of cheese sit among pails of whey. The scene tells you something important. Cheese belonged so naturally to pastoral life that a poet could use it to make a monster's home feel real. Of course, Polyphemus is not exactly the ideal host. Greek storytelling often mixes the ordinary with the terrifying. There are cheeses, milk pails, lambs, and also a giant with poor social skills. That odd combination makes the dairy details more vivid. You can almost hear the cave echo with animal breath and the dull scrape of a stone being moved. Cheese appears not as decoration, but as proof of livelihood. Even a mythic brute must manage his flock. Even a monster has chores. It is strangely comforting, in a sideways way, to imagine the Cyclops checking his curds. Greek myth also gives cheesemaking a divine shimmer. The culture connected pastoral skill with figures such as Aristaeus, a rustic god or culture hero associated with beekeeping, olive cultivation, hunting, and dairying. In stories around him, human crafts are not random tricks. They're gifts, discoveries, or lessons with sacred flavour. You stand at a small rural shrine where garlands dry in the heat, and bees drift around offerings. The scent of honey mingles with milk, herbs, and dust. A bowl of curds might sit there, plain and humble, yet touched by reverence. The gods of Greece do not always behave well, to put it mildly, but they do seem to appreciate good provisions. At the market, cheese becomes noisier. You walk into an agora where voices fold over one another. Traders call prices, donkeys stamp, pottery clatters, fish smell sharply from one side, olives glisten in bowls, and baskets of cheese wait under cloth to keep away flies and sun. You touch a small round cheese, firm at the edges, cooler beneath its covering. A seller breaks off a piece. It tastes salty, sour and grassy, with the faint bite of sheep's milk nearby. Someone argues about the fairness of the price with the passion of a philosopher defending the nature of justice. Perhaps it is the nature of justice. Perhaps it is just lunch. Cheese appears on Greek tables in many moods. It can be eaten with bread, olives, figs, onions, herbs, or wine. It can be used in cakes and offerings. It can nourish workers and travellers. Athletes may eat it for strength, and later stories speak of famous competitors consuming impressive quantities of food, including cheese. One legendary strongman, Milo of Croton, was said to have eaten enormous daily amounts of meat, bread, and wine, with cheese sometimes entering the wider tradition of athletic diet and rural strength. Whether the numbers are believable is another matter. Ancient writers enjoyed exaggeration almost as much as modern people enjoy pretending their snack is just a small bite. Your evening carries you into a symposium, a drinking party where couches line the room and conversation floats between seriousness and mischief. Lamps glow softly, perfumed oil warms on skin. Wine is mixed with water in a large bowl, because drinking undiluted wine was often considered uncivilized by Greeks, and naturally every culture needs a way to feel superior while still getting tipsy. Food is passed around bread, fruit, perhaps little dishes of cheese. A musician plucks a lyre. The strings make a tender silvery sound. Someone recites poetry. Someone else makes a clever remark that probably sounds wiser after the third cup. A quirky tidbit waits in one of the most famous poems of all. In the Iliad, a woman named Hecamede prepares a drink for Nestor and Machaon that includes wine, barley meal, and grated goat cheese. Grated cheese in a heroic battlefield epic. It is a strangely domestic detail, like finding a cheese grater in the middle of thunder. You can imagine the motion, the scraping sound, the pale flakes falling into dark wine, the smell of sharp goat cheese rising with grain and alcohol. It may not be your preferred bedtime beverage, but it shows how flexible cheese could be in the Greek imagination. It belonged not only to shepherds, but also to warriors, healers, and poetic refreshment. In kitchens, cheese slips into sweet and savoury foods. Fresh cheese can be mixed with honey, shaped into cakes, or offered during festivals. You feel flour dust on your fingers as someone presses a cheese mixture into a small round form. Honey shines amber in the lamplight. The finished cake is soft, fragrant, and faintly smoky from the oven. Ancient Greek food is often simpler than modern fantasy feasts suggest, but simple does not mean dull. A little cheese, a little honey, a little heat, and suddenly the room smells like comfort wearing a wreath. The scholarly uncertainties remain as soft-edged as curd. Specialists still argue about how closely ancient Greek cheeses resembled modern Greek varieties, including whether anything like today's feta can be traced directly in flavour, texture, and method to classical practices. Brined sheep and goat cheeses are certainly ancient in the Eastern Mediterranean, but a modern protected cheese name is not the same thing as a timeless object floating unchanged through history. Recipes shift, animals change, salt levels vary, storage jars differ. The past refuses to fit neatly into a package, which is inconvenient but honest. There is another uncertainty in the words themselves. Greek sources use names for cheeses and dairy foods that do not always map cleanly onto modern categories. A term may refer to fresh curd, aged cheese, pressed cheese, or a broader dairy preparation. Now, you can read the word, but you cannot always taste it. You cannot know whether it crumbled dryly, stretched softly, or smelled powerful enough to make a philosopher pause mid-argument. The missing sensory details leave room for imagination, and imagination, when handled gently, is one of history's softer tools. As the day cools, you follow a shepherd along a narrow track above the sea. The wind changes, it carries salt from the water, resin from pines, and the warm mineral scent of rock releasing heat. The flock moves in a loose cloud of woolen bells. The shepherd carries bread, olives, and a piece of cheese wrapped in cloth. He sits near a low wall, breaks the cheese with his thumb, and eats slowly while the sky turns rose and gold. No banquet, no temple, no epic monster, just a human being, hungry after work, fed by animals and skill. That ordinary meal may be the truest heart of Greek cheese. It belongs to poems and gods, yes, but also to hillsides, baskets, markets, and tired hands. It is food for people who must make use of difficult land. It is portable pasture. It is milk made patient. Around you, the goats settle into shadow, still looking faintly judgmental, as goats have every right to do. A final bell rings once in the quiet. You taste salt on your lips, feel rough cloth in your palm, and watch the first star appear above the darkening ridge. In the hush of the Greek evening, cheese is no longer merely useful. It has become story, offering, trade, humour, strength, and a small white piece of daily life resting beside bread. You step onto a Roman road at dawn, where the stones still hold the night's coolness, and the horizon glows with a pale, disciplined light. Around you, the empire wakes in layers. Mules snort under packs. Cartwheels creak. Sandaled feet slap against paving stones with a steady rhythm, somewhere nearby. A soldier adjusts his belt and mutters about breakfast, which is perhaps the most historically believable thing a soldier can do. The air smells of damp wool, leather straps, wood smoke, and the sharp green scent of crushed herbs along the roadside. Rome is a world of movement. Roads run outward like veins. Ships cross the Mediterranean with grain, oil, wine, pottery, salted fish, spices, and rumours. Armies march, officials travel, merchants bargain in ports, farmers supply towns, and cheese, wonderfully practical, travels with them. It does not demand a bronze statue. It does not need poetry to justify itself. It simply survives in a bag, a basket, a storeroom, or a soldier's ration, quietly making the empire more edible. You walk beside a group of legionaries as morning stretches into heat. Their packs are heavy, their tunics rough, their shields knocking softly against their sides. Dust rises with every step and settles on skin, lips, eyelashes. A soldier carries hard bread, perhaps some olives, a little bacon or salted meat if fortune has been kind, and cheese. The cheese is firm, salty, and dense enough to withstand travel. You take it in your hand and feel its dry surface, slightly oily where the warmth has touched it. It smells sour, animal, and clean in the way preserved food can smell clean, with salt doing the serious work. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Roman writers described cheesemaking in practical detail. Columella, an agricultural author of the 1st century, gave instructions about milk, rennet, draining, salting, pressing, and preserving cheese. That matters because Rome did not treat cheese as a vague countryside trick. It became part of written agricultural knowledge, the kind landowners and estate managers cared about. In Roman thinking, a good farm was an organised machine of soil, animals, labour, storage, and profit. Cheese fit into that machine beautifully. It turned daily milk into a product that could be consumed, sold, stored, or transported. You enter a villa farm where production is not casual. The estate is alive with sound. Cows low from an enclosure. Goats scrape their horns against a fence. A slave carries a pail, careful not to spill. In a workroom shaded from direct sun, milk is poured into broad vessels, rennet is added, curds form. They are cut, lifted, packed into moulds and weighted, whey drains away in shining threads. The floor feels cool underfoot, but the air is rich with moisture and milk. Wooden forms leave patterns on the cheese. Pressing gives shape. Salting gives endurance. Time gives character. When time is allowed to have an opinion, Rome did not invent cheese, but Rome was very good at spreading habits. It absorbed local traditions, classified them, moved them, sold them, and sometimes bragged about them. In the markets of Rome, you might find cheeses from nearby farms, from mountainous regions, from sheep country, from goat herds, and from distant provinces. Some were fresh and delicate, some were smoked, some were aged, some were soft enough to spread, others were hard enough to grate. The variety hints at a world where regional foods already carried identity. A cheese could announce where it came from almost as clearly as an accent. You arrive at a market in the city itself, and suddenly everything is louder. Vendors shout over one another. Customers squeeze fruit, inspect fish, sniff wine, and pretend they are not impressed by expensive imports. Metal scales clink. Dogs nose around stalls with professional interest. A cheesemonger cuts a wedge with a short knife and hands you a taste. The texture is firm but yielding. Salt touches first, then acidity, then the deep flavour of sheep's milk. Around you, baskets are stacked with rounds wrapped in leaves or cloth. Some cheeses are pale and fresh, others are darker from smoke or age. Rome likes options, and Rome likes to charge for them. The Romans had a special affection for practical luxury. A simple food could remain humble in one house and become refined in another. Cheese might be eaten by labourers with bread. It might be served at dinner with fruit, eggs, herbs, or wine. It might enter recipes, sauces, cakes, and savoury mixtures. In the Roman cookbook associated with Apicius, cheese appears in preparations that remind you how comfortably it moved from countryside to table. One dish might be straightforward and rustic. Another might involve enough ingredients to suggest that a wealthy host was trying very hard to be remembered. You follow the smell of cooking into a kitchen where heat presses against your face. Charcoal glows red. Clay pots simmer. A cook pounds herbs in a mortar with garlic, oil, vinegar, and cheese. The pestle makes a thick, wet sound against stone. The mixture becomes pungent, creamy, green, and sharp. This is the world of moritum, a rustic cheese and herb spread known from Latin literature. It is simple, but not boring. Garlic fills the room with a noble lack of subtlety. The cheese binds everything together, spread on bread. It is strong enough to wake the sleepiest farmhand and possibly discourage close conversation for several hours. Here is a quirky Roman tidbit. Soft enough for bedtime, but strange enough to keep the mind glowing, ancient sources mention cheeses made with unusual methods, including smoking, aging in different places, and using various coagulants. Roman agricultural writing discusses rennet not only from young animals, but also alternatives such as fig sap and other plant materials. So, somewhere in the empire, a cheesemaker may have looked at a fig tree and thought, "Yes, you shall help with dinner." It sounds odd, but plant coagulants remain part of some cheesemaking traditions. The ancient kitchen was curious, experimental, and only occasionally overconfident. You leave the city and travel north, where Roman roads cut through landscapes that will later become famous for their own cheeses. The empire stretches across Gaul, Hispania, Britannia, the Alps, the Balkans, North Africa, and the eastern provinces. Everywhere. People already have local foodways. Rome does not erase them completely. It overlays them with trade, taxes, military supply, urban demand, and written estate management. Cheese becomes part of this exchange between local practice and imperial appetite. A mountain cheese can come down to a town. A farm product can enter a ration system. A provincial habit can become known to travellers. At an army fort near a frontier, the air changes. It is colder. Smoke hangs low. Wet wool smells heavier than dry wool, which is unfortunate news for everyone involved. Soldiers gather near a hearth, their hands reddened by chill. One breaks a hard piece of cheese into a bowl of hot grain porridge. It softens at the edges, releasing fat and salt. Another eats his with bread and watered wine. The meal is not elegant, but it is steady. You feel the warmth of the bowl against your palms and understand why durable foods build empires more reliably than speeches. Grand monuments impress the eye. Rations keep people walking. Cheese also belongs to the countryside's seasonal logic. Milk is more abundant at certain times of year. Animals give different milk depending on pasture, weather, and breeding cycles. Roman farmers must think about when to make fresh cheese, when to press harder cheeses, when to salt, when to smoke, when to sell, and when to store. Storage rooms become small climates of their own. A cool cellar smells of stone, brine, wood, and faint ammonia. Wheels rest on shelves, turned and watched. Mould may be welcome or unwelcome depending on kind, place, and human tolerance. The line between delicacy and disaster can be thin, and ancient noses had to be educated. Historians still argue whether Roman cheesemaking directly shaped particular later European cheese families, or whether many similarities come from broader pastoral techniques that developed independently in different regions. The problem is tempting. When you see Roman descriptions of pressing, salting, smoking, and aging, it is easy to draw straight lines toward familiar modern cheeses. But history is rarely a straight road. Even in Rome, recipes vanish. Local methods evolve. Populations shift. Climate changes. Words survive while textures disappear. The result is a landscape of possibilities rather than a tidy family tree. There is also uncertainty in Roman taste. Some cheeses praised in antiquity are impossible to identify with confidence. A name in a text may refer to a place, a style, a texture, or a reputation that has faded. You can know that a cheese was admired without knowing whether it was mild, sharp, crumbly, smoky, sheepy, goaty, or powerful enough to clear a dining room. The old writers leave you clues, not a tasting menu. You must walk through the evidence as through a market at closing time, catching scents from stalls already being packed away. As sunset warms the road, you rest beside a milestone. The day's heat lifts from the stones. Crickets begin their small evening work. A cart passes carrying amphorae, ropes groaning softly under strain. A traveller sits nearby and unwraps a meal bread, figs, a little wine, and a wedge of cheese. He cuts it with a worn knife. The blade clicks faintly against the stone where he rests it. The cheese is dry at the rind, creamier within, tasting of salt, sheep, smoke, and distance. It has come from somewhere, and it is going somewhere, just like everyone on this road. That is the Roman gift to cheese movement. Not a single invention, not one perfect recipe, but a vast habit of carrying, classifying, feeding, and trading. Cheese rides with soldiers, waits in villas, appears in markets, enters recipes, and crosses borders that are political for humans but meaningless to goats. It becomes ordinary across an extraordinary system, and as night folds itself over the road, you hear the empire settle around you in soft fragments, hooves, wheels, low voices, insects, the sigh of an animal in the dark. In your hand, a small piece of preserved milk remains firm and patient, ready for the next mile. You enter a medieval abbey in the blue-grey hour before sunrise, when the world feels as if it is holding its breath. The stone beneath your feet is cold enough to travel through the soles of your shoes. A bell begins to ring, slow and deep, spreading across fields, orchards, barns, and sleeping roofs. It is not loud in the way a market is loud. It is commanding in a tired, holy sort of way, as if even the bell would prefer 5 more minutes. But discipline has won again. The abbey rises from the countryside like a patient stone animal. Its walls are thick, its windows are narrow, its roofs are dark with rain. Around it lie gardens, pastures, workshops, fish ponds, grain stores, and animal sheds. The air smells of damp earth, smoke, beeswax, wool, old wood, and the faint sourness of milk being worked somewhere out of sight. You hear sandals scrape along a corridor, robes whisper. A door opens with a low groan. Someone coughs softly, then remembers silence. This is a place built for prayer, but also for labour. Medieval monasteries are not only spiritual houses, many are complex estates, managing land, livestock, mills, vineyards, kitchens, dairies, and storage rooms. Their days move according to bells, offices, seasons, and chores. The monks chant, copy manuscripts, feed the poor when they can, tend animals, brew ale, press grapes, harvest grain, and make food last through the hungry months. Cheese fits this rhythm perfectly. It rewards patience. It accepts repetition. It prefers cool rooms, careful hands, and a willingness to wait. Monastic life, in other words, is practically a dating profile for cheese. You follow a lay brother toward the dairy. He's not glamorous. His sleeves are rolled. His hands are reddened by cold water and work. The room is low, whitewashed and shadowy. A fire burns nearby, not blazing, just steady enough to warm milk without bullying it. Milk sits in broad tubs, cream-coloured beneath a skin of steam. The smell is warm, grassy, and animal, softened by smoke. A wooden paddle rests against the wall, smooth from years of use. When you touch it, it feels slightly oily, polished by fat and time. Milk arrives from the abbey's cows, sheep or goats, depending on region and resources. The animals graze on fields owned or managed by the monastery. Their feeding is not accidental. Good pasture means good milk, and good milk means better cheese. A brother may know which meadow gives sweetness, which slope gives stronger flavour, which season brings richer fat. He may not speak in modern chemistry, but his senses are trained. He watches the milk thicken. He feels the curd between finger and thumb. He listens for the change in sound as curds are stirred, a soft shifting, like wet pebbles moving underwater. A mainstream historical fact stands quietly in this stone room medieval monasteries helped preserve, refine, and record many food-making traditions in Europe, including cheese-making. Their estates had animals, labour, storage spaces, and routines that allowed craft to become consistent. Not every famous cheese was invented by monks, despite what charming labels may suggest, but monastic communities played a major role in improving and sustaining methods. In a world where written records were limited and regional knowledge could vanish with war, famine, or migration, an abbey could hold a technique in memory. The curd is cut slowly, where gleams yellow-green in the tub. The brother lifts curds into cloth, and the cloth darkens as liquid drains through it. You hear dripping into a wooden bucket, steady as a sleepy clock. Salt is measured, not by a digital scale, obviously, because the Middle Ages are already doing enough, but by habit and experience. Too little salt, and the cheese spoils. Too much, and it becomes harsh. The right amount protects without silencing flavour. That balance is one of the old arts, learned through failure, and failure in food preservation is a rather persuasive teacher. In the pressing room, wooden moulds wait on a table. Some are simple hoops, some leave marks on the rind. Curds are packed, weighted, turned, and pressed again. The work is physical, but calm. You feel the damp edge of the cloth, the firmness of curd under pressure, the grain of wood against your palm. Nothing happens quickly. The cheese must become itself by stages. It drains, it firms, it accepts salt, it grows a rind. It listens to the cellar, which sounds ridiculous until you stand in one and understand. The cellar is where the abbey seems to breathe underground. You descend worn steps into a cooler darkness. The air changes at once. It is moist, mineral, and close. Stone walls bead with water. Shelves hold wheels, rounds, blocks, and little pale shapes wrapped in cloth or resting bare. The smell is powerful but layered earth, mushrooms, cream, wet stone, old straw, salt, and something frankly suspicious. A novice might wrinkle his nose. An older monk merely nods, as if greeting a colleague. The rind is alive with invisible work, and this invisible work does not care whether anyone finds it elegant. Here cheeses are washed, turned, brushed, and watched. Some rinds are rubbed with brine, some may be bathed with ale, wine, or spirits, depending on the house and region. This is the quirky tidbit quietly glowing in the damp. Certain monastic-style washed-rind cheeses became famous for aromas so strong they seem almost to have taken vows of their own. The smell can be meaty, yeasty, barn-like, or startlingly human. A polite guest might call it complex. A tired novice might call it the cellar fighting back. Yet that washing encourages particular microbes to thrive, creating the orange, sticky, pungent rinds that later cheese lovers either adore or flee with impressive speed. The monks do not think of microbes, they think of practice. Wash on this day. Turn on that day. Keep this shelf cooler. Move that wheel higher. Open the door when the air grows too heavy. Close it when the draft feels wrong. The craft is a conversation with conditions, humidity, temperature, salt, milk, wood, stone, and time all speak in small signals. A crack in the rind matters. A smell matters. A patch of mould matters. The cheese is not abandoned in storage. It is cared for like a slow, silent animal. Monastic rules shape food in surprising ways. Many religious communities observe fast days and restrictions on meat, though the details vary by order, region, and century. Dairy foods can become especially useful in those patterns. When permitted, cheese supplies fat and protein without slaughter, which makes it valuable in kitchens trying to satisfy both hunger and discipline. You sit in a refectory where long tables stand beneath dim light. The meal is simple bread, pottage, perhaps herbs, perhaps cheese. A reader's voice rises from a lectern while everyone eats in silence. Spoons scrape bowls, bread crust cracks. A piece of cheese softens in the warmth of your hand. The abbey's cheese may also move outward. It can feed guests, travellers, workers, tenants, and the poor. It can be sold or exchanged. It can pay, reward, or sustain. In regions where monasteries hold significant land, their dairies become part of local economies. A wheel made in a quiet room may end up in a town, at a noble table, or in a peasant household connected to monastic land. The cloister wall does not keep food from histories, as it simply filters it through order, prayer, and excellent storage. Historians still argue whether monastic communities truly invented many celebrated European cheeses, or whether later tradition gave monks credit for techniques first developed by local farmers, herders, and village women. This argument matters because romantic stories love a hooded figure in a candlelit cellar. It is a beautiful image, and sometimes it contains truth. But rural knowledge often begins outside the written record. A farmer's wife, a shepherd, or a village dairy worker may have shaped a method long before an abbey preserved it. The monastery may be the archive, not always the birthplace. There is another uncertainty in the silence itself. Monks wrote many things, but they did not write everything. Practical knowledge often passed hand to hand, not page to page. The exact temperature of a room, the feel of a properly set curd, the smell of a rind ready to wash. These are difficult to capture in Latin notes. A recipe might say what to do, but not how it feels when it is right. So you stand in the cellar among sleeping cheeses and understand that part of this history lives in gestures that were never fully recorded. Outside, the day has matured. Rain begins, soft at first, then steadier, tapping on roof tiles and darkening the courtyard stones. The abbey smells greener in rain. Wet wool hangs near the doorway. Smoke leans low from the kitchen. The cows shift in their shelter, warm and heavy-eyed. A brother carries a small wheel from the pressing room to the cellar, cradling it with the seriousness of someone escorting a minor treasure. It is pale, fresh, and unassuming. It gives no hint of what it may become. You remain there a moment longer, surrounded by dripping stone and patient shelves. The abbey teaches cheese, a new kind of discipline. Not speed, not spectacle, not conquest, just care repeated until it becomes tradition. The milk of a morning is turned into food for winter. The dampness of a cellar becomes a tool. Silence becomes attention. Time, which ruins so much, is persuaded to improve something instead. As evening prayer gathers in the church, voices rise in a low chant that vibrates through the floor and seems to settle into the stones. In the cellar, the wheels rest in darkness, brushed by cool air, salted, washed, turned, and remembered. You breathe in the strange, holy mixture of wax, rain, milk, and earth. The world outside may be uncertain, hungry, and rough around the edges, but here a simple transformation continues with quiet confidence. Cheese becomes craft, craft becomes memory, and memory takes the shape of a wheel sleeping under stone. You enter a town on market morning, when the streets are already awake and pretending they have been sensible about it. Dawn has barely cleared the rooftops, but voices rise from the square, carts grind over stones, and chickens object to everything with impressive commitment. The air is cool at first, carrying smells of wet timber, horse sweat, straw, baking bread, damp wool, onions, smoke, and the unmistakable tang of cheese wrapped in cloth, packed in straw, stacked in baskets, and guarded by sellers who have heard every bargain before. You move between stalls as the day brightens. The town is not large, not by modern standards, but it feels full because everything useful has arrived at once. A woman sells eggs from a shallow basket. A butcher sharpens a knife with a slow, metallic hiss. A fishmonger stands in a cloud of salt and river smell. Near the centre of the market, under a patched canvas awning, cheeses sit like small pale moons, brown wheels, white blocks, and wrinkled little rounds. Some are fresh and soft, still moist beneath their cloth. Others are firm, waxy, smoked, blue-veined, or covered with rinds that look as though they have survived both winter and gossip. You reach for a wheel and feel its surface under your fingertips. The rind is dry, slightly rough, and cooled from the morning air. A seller cuts into it with a short blade. The knife makes a quiet satisfying sound as it enters the paste. A wedge opens, creamy near the centre, darker toward the rind. The scent comes up slowly, salt, cream, cellar, grass, and something earthy, like mushrooms resting in old leaves. You taste a crumb. It is sharper than fresh curd, more complicated, less innocent. Milk has learned a few things. This is the age when cheese begins to wear place names more confidently. A village, valley, cave, abbey, manor, county, or market town can become attached to a particular style. People may begin to say that a cheese from here is not like a cheese from there, and they may say it with the calm violence of regional pride. The wheel on this stall is not merely food, it is a reputation. It carries the pasture, the animals, the salt source, the cellar, the hands of the maker, and the opinion of everyone who insists their local version is the only proper one. Humanity has invented many serious conflicts, but never underestimate a village defending its cheese. A mainstream historical fact sits at the heart of this busy square medieval and early modern towns often regulated food markets through rules about weights, measures, prices, quality, and fraud. Cheese, like bread, ale, butter, fish, and meat, could be inspected, taxed, weighed, and judged. Market officials cared because urban people depended on rural supply, and spoiled or underweight food could cause anger quickly. A bad cheese was not just disappointing, it could be dishonest, unsafe, and socially risky. The town did not need a riot over curds, although somewhere, surely. A clerk had a nervous dream about exactly that. You pause near a set of scales. Iron weights sit in a row, cold and dark, each one worn by repeated use. A buyer watches carefully as the seller weighs a cheese. The buyer's face says, "Trust, but verify." A phrase not yet printed on office mugs but already alive in the human soul. The seller trims a little from the edge, then weighs again. Coins pass from hand to hand. Their clink is small, but the exchange has layers: animal care, dairy work, transport, market fees, town rules, appetite, and a little suspicion. Cheese is now part of a commercial world, not only a domestic one. Some sellers come from nearby farms, others arrive from districts already known for particular dairy goods. In England, cheeses associated with places such as Cheshire and later Cheddar would build strong reputations. In France, mountain and cave-ripened cheeses would become linked with specific landscapes. In the Low Countries, trade helped spread hard, durable cheeses that could travel well. Across Europe, local methods hardened into identity. One region used more cow's milk, another leaned on sheep or goats, one salted heavily, another aged in damp caves, one smoked cheese over wood. Another washed the rind until it smelled as if it had opinions about theology. You follow a cart leaving the market and entering a lane that slopes toward the edge of town. The road is muddy where rain has collected, and your boots pull free with soft sucking sounds. Beyond the last houses, fields open under a sky the colour of pewter. The cheesemaker's place is not picturesque in the polished way of paintings. It is practical. There are barrels, boards, buckets, cloths, straw, animals, flies, steam, and a yard where someone has clearly lost an argument with mud. Yet the work inside is precise. In the dairy room, the light is dim and milky. Curds rest in moulds. Fresh cheeses drain on racks, releasing whey that smells faintly sweet and sour. A cat sits near the door looking innocent, which is never a good sign. The cheesemaker turns around with both hands, her palms pressed gently along the edge, testing firmness. She knows if the curd is too wet. She knows if the salt has taken properly. She knows which shelf in the cellar makes a cheese mild and which corner encourages a stronger rind. Her knowledge is local, physical, and stubborn. A recipe can help, but the room itself teaches. You descend into a natural cave where some cheeses are carried for aging. The air cools at once and touches your skin like damp cloth. Drops of water fall from stone with soft clicks. The smell is mineral, fungal, salty, and deep. On shelves or in niches, cheeses rest in rows. Some are pierced by blue veins, blooming inward like tiny storm maps. Mould, which might horrify a careless eater, becomes a partner when understood. It can protect, flavour, soften, sharpen, and transform. It is not decoration. It is a living workforce, unpaid and invisible, which is very convenient for everyone except perhaps the mould. The famous legend of Roquefort belongs to this mood of caves and accident. A shepherd, so the story goes, left bread and sheep's milk cheese in a cave while distracted by romantic pursuit. When he returned, mould had entered the cheese, and instead of throwing it away like a sensible person with no imagination, he tasted it and discovered something extraordinary. Is the tale true? It sounds suspiciously perfect, as origin stories often do. It has youth, desire, forgetfulness, danger, and dairy. Very efficient storytelling. Still, the legend captures a real truth cave environments. Bread moulds, sheep's milk, and aging conditions can create flavours that feel almost magical. Such stories gather around many cheeses. A village claims a recipe began when a farmer forgot a basket. A monk dropped something into brine. A milkmaid made a mistake during a storm. A noble tasted a rustic wheel and declared it worthy. A traveller carried cheese too long and improved it by neglect. The lazy person's finest dream. These tales are not always factual, but they show how communities explain transformation. Cheese is mysterious enough to invite myth. It begins as milk, passes through sourness, salt, pressure, mould, and darkness, then emerges as something people will cross a market square to buy. No wonder imagination gets involved. In town taverns, cheese takes on another life. You enter a low room warmed by bodies, fire, and ale. Smoke stains the beams. Rushes crackle underfoot. A musician plays a pipe near the wall, and the tune curls through the room like smoke that has learned manners. Workers sit shoulder to shoulder over bread, onions, beer, and slices of local cheese. Someone complains that the cheese from the next valley is too bland. Someone else says the town's own cheese was better before a certain family started making it in larger batches. Food criticism, you discover, did not wait for newspapers. Cheese also becomes part of gifting and obligation. A tenant might owe dairy goods as rent. A household might send a fine cheese to a patron. A town might present local products during visits from important guests. In a world where long-distance branding is still young, a well-regarded cheese can speak for a place. It says, "Our pasture is good. Our women and men know their craft. Our animals are healthy. Our sellers are disciplined. Our town is not to be underestimated." This is a lot to ask from preserved milk, but cheese has always been ambitious in a quiet way. Food historians still argue whether some famous medieval cheese names refer to consistent recipes, broad regional categories, or simply goods traded through a particular market. A name might mean the cheese was actually made in that place, or that it was sold there, or that merchants used the name because customers recognized it. The label survives more clearly than the method. A document may mention a cheese from a certain town, but not tell you how long it aged, how salty it tasted, how the rind smelled, or whether the maker would have approved of the modern version wearing the same name. This uncertainty is not a failure. It is part of the texture. Historical cheese is difficult because it is alive while it is made, then usually eaten. Records preserve payments, disputes, taxes, recipes, and praise, but not the full sensation of a market wedge on the tongue. You must gather the clues: a place name here, a price there, a description of mould, a complaint about fraud, a rule about measures, a traveller's admiration, piece by piece. The market becomes audible again. Evening lowers over the town. Stalls are being packed away. Straw clings to the cobbles. A dog licks at a dropped rind with solemn devotion. The cheesemonger wraps unsold wedges in cloth, stacking them in a crate for the ride home. The air has cooled, but it still carries the day's smell: smoke, ale, mud, animals, bread, and the lingering sour richness of dairy. Shutters close. A cart creaks toward the gate, somewhere in a cellar. Wheels continue changing without applause. You stand at the edge of the square as the last light fades from tiled roofs and chimney smoke turns blue. Cheese has become more than a survival food, more than a monastic craft, more than a farmstead habit. It has become local pride, market trust, rural income, urban appetite, and story. It can carry a village name farther than a villager may ever travel. It can make neighbours boast, merchants haggle, officials inspect, and legends grow in damp caves where silence tastes faintly of salt. The town settles into night, but the wheels on their shelves keep working in darkness, slowly becoming the flavours that people will defend tomorrow. You stand on a harbour quay in the early morning, with salt wind pressing gently against your face and gulls crying above the masts. The water below is dark green, slapped by oars and dripping ropes. Barrels roll over planks with hollow thuds. Sailors shout from deck to dock. Somewhere, a horse stamps nervously at the smell of the sea, and honestly, who can blame it? The harbour smells of tar, fish, wet wood, smoke, old rope, and provisions packed for distance. Among those provisions, wrapped, sealed, salted, and guarded against damp, is cheese. Ocean travel changes everything about food. Land journeys are difficult, but a road still offers villages, wells, orchards, fields, and animals along the way. A ship is different. Once the coastline fades, hunger must be planned in advance. Fresh food disappears quickly, water turns stale, bread hardens, meat is salted into obedience. Beer and wine become safer companions than plain water in some conditions. Cheese enters this floating world because it is compact, nourishing, and less dramatic than a goat on deck. Though ships certainly carried live animals too, with all the grace and fragrance that implies. You climb aboard and feel the deck shift beneath your feet. It is not a large movement, but it is constant, a reminder that the world has become unstable. Coils of rope scratch your hand. Canvas snaps above you. A block creaks as a sail rises. Below deck, the air thickens into a warm, close mixture of bodies: bilge water, stale smoke, salted meat, damp wool, and stored food. A sailor lifts the lid from a cask and pulls out a hard cheese wrapped in cloth. Its surface is dry, salty, and tough enough to suggest that softness has been deliberately discouraged. He cuts it with a knife and eats it beside coarse bread, chewing slowly as the ship begins to leave the harbour behind. A mainstream historical fact belongs to this crossing world. European colonists brought cattle, sheep, goats, and dairy-making traditions to the Americas, Southern Africa, Australia, and other colonised regions, where cheese adapted to new climates, pastures, labour systems, and trade routes. Dairy animals did not simply arrive as livestock. They carried whole habits with them: milking schedules, curdling methods, storage practices, ideas about land use, and expectations about what a proper household or settlement should produce. Cheese travelled not only as food in a barrel, but as memory in the hands of settlers, sailors, missionaries, soldiers, enslaved workers, and migrants. The first shock is landscape. You step from the ship into a coastal settlement where the air feels different from the port you left. It may be humid and heavy, or dry and brilliant, or cold enough that breath smokes in the morning. The grasses are unfamiliar. The trees are unfamiliar. The insects seem to have formed a committee. Animals imported from Europe must adjust to new diseases, new forage, new seasons, and sometimes poor handling by people who are also barely adjusting. Milk production depends on the animal's health, and cheesemaking depends on the milk. So the old recipes do not simply unfold like a remembered song. They stumble, revise, and listen to the land. In a small colonial dairy, you watch milk being poured into a wooden tub. The room smells of fresh cream, smoke, mud, and a sharp note of vinegar from souring milk. The floorboards are uneven under your feet. Outside, someone chops wood. A child chases chickens away from the doorway with the seriousness of a royal guard. The cheesemaker uses a method known from home, but the milk behaves a little differently. The heat is too strong. The air is too damp. Salt is scarce or expensive. Rennet may be difficult to obtain. Cloth moulds, wooden presses, and storage shelves must be made from local materials. Nothing is quite the same. And yet the goal remains steady: save the milk, feed the household, create value. In the Americas, European cattle changed landscapes dramatically. Herds multiplied on grasslands, ranches, missions, plantations, and farms. Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, French, and British communities carried varied dairy habits, though not all regions developed cheese production at the same pace. In some places, climate favoured fresh cheeses eaten quickly. In others, cooler conditions allowed firmer cheeses to age. Indigenous communities encountered these animals and products in many different ways, sometimes resisting, sometimes adapting, sometimes incorporating dairy into local economies. Enslaved Africans and their descendants also became part of dairy labour in colonies, often doing the skilled work while receiving little credit in records written by owners and officials. You stand in the shade of a mission courtyard where bells hang in a tower and cattle graze beyond an adobe wall. Dust lifts around hooves, the sun warms the plaster until it smells faintly baked. Milk is collected in clay or wooden vessels. Fresh cheese is formed into small rounds, salted lightly, and eaten with maize foods, beans, chilies, or bread, depending on region and household. The cheese tastes mild, bright and lactic, softer than shipboard wheels, more immediate, more responsive to heat. It belongs to a new table, not because it is free from coercion or conflict, but because food always enters tangled human worlds. Farther north, in colonial farms where winters bite hard, cheese becomes a way to store summer abundance. You enter a farmhouse kitchen in late afternoon. The hearth glows. Smoke curls beneath dark beams. Milk from the morning and evening is combined, warmed, set, cut, and pressed. A cheese press stands near the wall, its screw darkened by use. When you turn the handle, the wood resists, then gives. Whey runs into a pan with a clean, watery sound. The curds tighten under weight. Your fingers feel damp cloth, warm curd, and the grain of the press. Outside, frost touches the grass. Inside, people are making food that can wait for winter. Cheese also becomes a traded colonial good. Wheels move from farms to towns, from towns to ports, from ports to ships, and from ships to distant markets. Some regions develop reputations for exporting cheese across water. Dutch cheeses, such as firm round styles sealed for travel, become important in long-distance commerce. British cheeses cross the Atlantic. Colonial American cheesemakers sell into local and regional markets, and eventually some communities become known for large, durable wheels. Portability matters. A cheese that survives a voyage has an advantage over one that collapses into a sad dairy puddle halfway across the sea. Here is your quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes had to share their cheese with uninvited tiny passengers. Cheese mites, small creatures that feed on aging cheeses, were familiar enough in parts of Europe to become the subject of jokes and disgusted fascination. Some people brushed them away, some accepted them as part of aging, some complained, quite reasonably, that their dinner appeared to be moving. There are old comic references to lively cheese, and while not every shipboard cheese crawled with mites, the possibility adds a humble truth to maritime food. The ocean was vast, the stars were glorious, and supper might need inspecting. On long voyages, cheese could also absorb the life of the ship. It might taste of salt air, cask wood, damp storage, or smoke. A badly stored cheese could sweat, mould in the wrong way, crack, or turn rancid. A well-kept one could remain a reliable comfort. You sit with sailors during a grey evening while rain hisses across the deck above. The lantern swings, making shadows bend and lengthen. Someone passes bread. Someone cuts cheese. The knife squeaks slightly through the hard paste. Men eat without ceremony. No one praises the cheese in elaborate terms. The compliment is that it is still edible. Cheese follows migration as much as empire. Families leaving Europe for new lands carry recipes in memory, not always on paper. A grandmother remembers how curd should feel. A father knows when to salt. A daughter watches the way cloth is tied. A son learns which corner of the cellar stays coolest. Across generations, these skills change. German-speaking migrants bring one style. Dutch settlers bring another. French families bring fresh and aged traditions. Italian migrants will later reshape urban cheese cultures with mozzarella, ricotta, provolone, and hard grating cheeses. Food identity travels in luggage, in habit, in longing, and sometimes in arguments around a kitchen table. Yet cheese in colonial worlds is not just a comforting story of recipes travelling politely. It is also so tied to land seizure, forced labour, environmental change, and the reorganisation of animal life. Cattle trample fields and spread across territories. Dairy farming requires pasture, fencing, water, and control over animals and people. You feel this when you stand at the edge of a new pasture cut from forest, or claimed from land already known and used by others. The grass smells sweet, but the history is not simple. Cheese can be wholesome on the table and still connected to hard systems beyond it. Bedtime history can be gentle without pretending humans were always gentle. Scholars continue to debate how much early colonial cheese reflected European continuity, and how much it became something new through indigenous knowledge, African labour, local materials, climate, trade, and necessity. The surviving documents often favour officials, merchants, missionaries, and landowners. They may name imported animals, taxes, shipments, and estate production while leaving out the hands that actually turned the curd. So the record is uneven. You can see the cheese moving through inventories and markets, but the room where it was made may remain dim, the worker unnamed, the method only half visible. In tropical colonies, the story takes another turn. Heat makes aged cheese difficult without careful salting, drying, or rapid consumption. Fresh cheeses become important, shaped by local cuisines and conditions. In parts of Latin America, fresh white cheeses enter daily meals, pairing with maize, cassava, beans, fruit, and chilies. They may be mild, crumbly, squeaky, or salty. They do not need to imitate European aged wheels to matter. They become their own forms of preserved or semi-preserved milk, fitted to warm climates and local tastes. A fresh cheese eaten at dawn with hot flatbread can carry as much history as any famous cave-aged wheel. Night settles over the port again. Ships rock in the dark water. Lanterns glow along the quay. A barrel is sealed. A cow lowing from a pen sounds restless after the voyage. Somewhere, a woman wraps fresh cheese in cloth for tomorrow's market. Somewhere else, a sailor stores a hard wedge for another crossing. The world has widened, and cheese has widened with it. It has crossed oceans in casks, in animals, in memory, in labour, and in hunger. You breathe the salt air and listen to waves knocking softly against the hulls. Cheese is no longer only the food of one region. one climate, or one tradition. It has become a traveller, adapting without losing its oldest purpose. It still answers the same quiet question: how do you keep milk a little longer and make it worth carrying? The sea gives no easy answer. It only rocks the ships and darkens under the moon, while somewhere below deck, wrapped in cloth and touched by salt, preserved milk waits for land. You step into a dairy in the 19th century, and the room feels familiar at first. Milk still steams in shallow vats. Curds still gather under careful hands. Salt still bites faintly at the air. Shelves still hold rounds and blocks in various states of patience. Yet something has changed. On a nearby table, beside cloths, knives, ladles, and wooden moulds, sits a microscope. It looks delicate, almost fussy, with brass fittings catching the lamplight. It seems out of place among buckets and wet stone floors, like a tiny scholar invited into a barn. Outside, horses pass on the road, wheels splashing through mud. Inside, the dairy smells of warm milk, vinegar, smoke, damp boards, and the mineral chill of washed stone. You hear the soft scrape of a thermometer being lifted from a vat. You hear glass clink against glass. Someone is taking notes. That may not sound dramatic, but for cheese it is a quiet revolution. The old craft, once guided mainly by touch, smell, habit, luck, and alarming amounts of confidence, is beginning to meet measurement. For most of cheese history, makers understand results without seeing the hidden agents behind them. They know that certain temperatures help milk set. They know that one starter works better than another. They know that some rooms produce good rinds and some rooms create sorrow. They know which cloths, shelves, buckets, caves, or tubs behave well. But they do not yet see the bacteria, yeasts, and moulds that turn milk into something deeper. They live with invisible partners, and like many invisible partners, those partners are doing most of the work while receiving very little credit. Now you lean over the microscope. A drop of liquid lies on a glass slide. Light passes through it. At first you see blur, shimmer, and confusion. Then shapes sharpen. Tiny forms appear, rods, spheres, clusters, faint movements. The world inside milk is crowded. It is busy. It is almost rude how much has been happening without permission. The microscope does not invent this world, it reveals it. Suddenly, souring is no longer merely a mood of milk, ripening is no longer a mysterious cellar blessing. Fermentation has actors. A mainstream historical fact belongs clearly in this lamplit room. Louis Pasteur and other 19th century scientists helped show that fermentation and spoilage were caused by microorganisms, not vague spontaneous forces. Pasteur's work on fermentation, wine, beer, and milk helped reshape food science. Heating liquids to reduce harmful microbes, later known as pasteurization, became one of the major tools of modern food safety. Cheese, being deeply connected to milk and microbes, could not remain untouched by this new understanding. You stand beside a vat as milk is warmed with unusual precision. The cheesemaker watches a thermometer instead of relying only on a finger dipped cautiously into the liquid. The milk smells sweet, grassy, and faintly animal. Steam softens the window glass. A clock ticks in the corner. Time matters now in minutes, not only in instinct. When starter culture is added, it is no longer just yesterday's sour milk or a lucky scrap from a successful batch. Increasingly, it can be selected, controlled, studied, and reproduced. This does not make the room less alive, it may make it more obviously alive. Bacteria feed on lactose and produce lactic acid. Acid changes the milk structure. Rennet helps casein proteins gather into curd. Cutting the curd releases whey. Heating, stirring, pressing, salting, and aging shape moisture and texture. Molds and surface microbes soften, sharpen, perfume, colour, and sometimes terrify. Every choice bends the cheese in a new direction. A cheese is not simply made once, it is negotiated into being. You touch a newly formed curd. It feels springy and fragile, warm against your fingertips. When the knife cuts through it, the surface parts cleanly, and whey rises bright and yellow. The cheesemaker watches how the curd heals at the cut. Too soft, and it will lose itself. Too firm, and it may become dry. Science offers instruments, but the hands are still necessary. The body still knows things a gauge cannot fully explain. The best makers do not abandon intuition, they give it new companions. In another room, glass bottles hold starter cultures. Labels identify strains with a neatness that would make a medieval cellar blink in disbelief. Some cultures produce mild acidity, some create buttery aromas, some help form tiny holes. Some contribute sharpness, sweetness, fruitiness, nuttiness, or that deep, savoury flavour people describe in words that sound calm until they are standing near a particularly enthusiastic rind. You smell warm butter, yoghurt, damp hay, mushrooms, toasted nuts, and a faint cellar funk. Each aroma is chemistry wearing a friendly mask. The science of cheese also enters factories, agricultural colleges, and government laboratories. Dairy schools begin teaching standardized methods. Researchers study milk composition, fat content, acidity, enzymes, pathogens, storage temperatures, and ripening conditions. Farmers and cheesemakers learn to test milk quality. Manuals describe procedures with the firm tone of people determined to make curd behave. In some places, this raises quality and safety. Bad milk can be detected more easily. Dangerous contamination can be reduced. Spoilage can be understood instead of merely cursed at, although cursing probably remains popular, because tradition is important. You visit a cheese laboratory where white coats hang near the door, slightly stiff from washing. The air is sharper here, less smoky, more chemical, with glass, alcohol, clean metal, and milk samples arranged in careful rows. A researcher warms a sample and records acidity. Another examines a rind under magnification. Shelves hold flasks, tubes, and notebooks. The sounds are small corks pulled free, pencils scratching, burners whispering, liquid pipetted drop by drop. The room is not romantic in the old rustic way, but it has its own hush. It is curiosity made orderly. One of the most important changes is the growing ability to separate helpful microbes from harmful ones. Cheese depends on microbial life, but not all microbial life is invited to dinner. Some bacteria create flavour and preservation. Others cause illness or ruin. Pasteurization can reduce risk by heating milk to kill many unwanted organisms, though cheesemakers must then add selected cultures to guide fermentation. This gives greater control, especially for large-scale production. But it also changes the microbial richness of raw milk. Safety and complexity begin one of cheese history's long, polite arguments. Scholars and cheesemakers remain divided over how much pasteurization improved cheese by protecting public health and consistency, and how much it narrowed flavour by reducing the wild microbial diversity of place. This is not a simple debate between romance and reason. Raw milk cheeses can carry extraordinary depth, but they require careful animal health, skilled handling, and strict conditions. Pasteurized milk cheeses can be beautiful, complex, and safer in many settings, but they depend on chosen cultures rather than the full native community in fresh milk. The argument has no sleepy little answer. It has regulations, traditions, risks, pleasures, and many passionate people holding knives. Here is a quirky tidbit for your softly wandering mind: the famous smell of some washed green cheeses, including the kind people either adore or banish from the kitchen, can come partly from bacteria related to those found on human skin. This helps explain why certain cheeses smell oddly foot-like. Not bad, exactly, just personal, very personal. The rind is not trying to insult you. It is simply expressing its microbial family tree with confidence. You stand over an orange, sticky cheese, and breathe in salt, yeast, damp cellar, and a suggestion of gym socks after spiritual growth. Cheese, as always, keeps us humble. Blue cheeses reveal another scientific wonder. Veins come from molds encouraged to grow inside the cheese. To help them breathe, makers pierce the cheese with needles, letting oxygen enter. You watch the piercing happen, thin rods slide into pale wheels, leaving narrow channels where blue-green life will bloom. The room smells cool, earthy, metallic, and sharp. The mould spreads slowly through the paste like painted smoke. What might look like spoilage becomes, under control, a prized flavour. The difference between ruin and delicacy is knowledge, timing, and not panicking at the sight of blue food. As scientific language grows, cheese gains a new vocabulary. Acidity is measured. Moisture is calculated. Fat is tested. Enzymes are named. Proteins are understood as structures that can be cut, linked, softened, and rearranged. Ripening becomes proteolysis and lipolysis, words that sound as if they belong in a stern textbook, but mean something tender and familiar. Proteins and fats breaking down into flavour. The cheese softens, aromas deepen, texture loosens. A young wheel becomes mature not by magic alone, but by countless tiny changes moving through it day by day. You sit in a ripening room where wooden shelves hold cheeses at carefully watched temperatures. A worker checks humidity and turns a wheel with gloved hands. The rind has a fine bloom, soft as velvet. The air touches your cheeks cool and damp. Fans hum faintly. A chart hangs on the wall. It lists dates, batches, temperatures, and notes. This is not the old cellar of pure instinct, but neither is it soulless. It is watchfulness given numbers. It is patience with a clipboard. Somehow, even that can be beautiful. There is also disappointment in the age of science. Standardization can flatten difference when used carelessly. If every batch must taste exactly the same, the wild personality of milk may be pushed aside. Seasonal variation, pasture change, local microbes, and maker judgment can become problems to eliminate instead of voices to hear. A cheese can become safe, reliable, profitable, and dull, which is a tragic but common journey for many things. Yet science can also protect rare traditions by explaining why they work. It can help small makers improve safety without losing character. It can identify the living communities that give old cheeses their soul. Night gathers beyond the laboratory windows. The lamps glow warmer against the glass. In the dairy, the last vat has been cleaned, and the floor is wet beneath your shoes. The smell of milk has faded into soap, steam, and stone. On the shelves, cheeses continue their invisible conversations. Bacteria make acid, enzymes loosen proteins, molds breathe through tiny channels, rinds thicken, centers soften, salt moves inward. Time does not stop, but now people can read more of its handwriting. You leave with the feeling that cheese has not lost its mystery. It has changed the shape of that mystery. The unseen world is no longer empty. It is crowded with helpers, spoilers, builders, and troublemakers. The microscope has opened the rind, and inside you find not an answer that ends wonder, but a deeper wonder with names. Milk becomes curd becomes cheese, and science leans close, not to silence the old craft, but to hear the quiet life moving through it. You wake into the industrial age under a ceiling of pale electric light, where milk no longer belongs only to the farmyard, the cellar, or the quiet hands of one household. It moves now in metal cans, glass bottles, pipes, tanks, trains, trucks, and refrigerated rooms that hum through the night. The air smells of steam, soap, hot metal, fresh milk, cardboard, and a faint buttery richness that clings to everything. The floor beneath your shoes is smooth, wet, and cold. Somewhere overhead, a belt turns with a soft mechanical rhythm, steady as breathing, though much less romantic. The dairy world has grown larger, faster, and more organised. Cities are hungry. Workers need affordable food. Armies need rations. Families want convenience. Farmers want stable buyers for their milk. Grocers want products that will not spoil in a dramatic little tragedy by Tuesday. Cheese, ancient and patient by nature, is pulled into a new system that values consistency, scale, transport, and shelf life. It is still milk transformed. But now it enters a world of stainless steel, factory whistles, printed labels, and managers who enjoy the phrase production efficiency perhaps a little too much. You walk beside a row of enormous vats, each one polished until it reflects the lights in blurry silver. Milk pours through pipes with a low rushing sound. Valves click, gauges tremble. A worker in a white coat checks temperature, acidity, and timing. The smell is clean, warm, and controlled, less wild than a farmhouse dairy, but not empty. Curds form in great quantities, stirred by mechanical arms that move with patient, circular certainty. You place a hand near the vat and feel heat rising through steam. Instead of one family judging curd by touch, a whole system now watches it through numbers. A mainstream historical fact rests in this bright room during the late 19th and 20th centuries. Cheesemaking became increasingly industrialized, especially in North America and Europe, with factories standardizing milk collection, production methods, packaging, and distribution. This changed cheese from a local or regional product into a widely available commercial food. Factory cheese could feed distant cities. It could be branded. It could be shipped reliably. It could taste the same in one town as in another, which was either a miracle or a small culinary tragedy. Depending on your mood and perhaps your relationship with supermarket cheddar, standardization brings comfort. A parent can buy the same block week after week. A school can order cheese for lunches. A factory can turn vast quantities of milk into predictable food. Waste may be reduced. Safety can improve. Prices can fall. Yet something is also lost when variation becomes a flaw. In a village dairy, a rainy spring might make one year's cheese softer, greener, and more delicate. In an industrial plant, that variation is corrected. The machine prefers sameness. The pasture's whisper becomes a data point. The cheese behaves, which is useful, though not always exciting. Now you move to the invention that changes the public image of cheese perhaps more than any cave. Monastery or market ever could processed cheese. Imagine trimmed bits of natural cheese being shredded, heated, blended with emulsifying salts, and poured into moulds or packages. The mixture becomes smooth, stable, meltable, and friendly to storage. It does not crumble. It does not separate easily. It can be sliced, stacked, wrapped, shipped, and melted over bread with an almost suspicious eagerness. In the early 20th century, James L. Kraft helped popularize and patent methods for pasteurized processed cheese, making it one of the defining dairy products of modern food commerce. You stand near the processing line and watch molten cheese flow like a glossy golden ribbon. It moves through pipes and nozzles, then settles into boxes, loaves, or slices. The smell is mild, salty, and creamy, with a cooked note like warm milk and toasted crust. A worker lifts a fresh sheet of wrapped slices, and the plastic crackles sharply between gloved fingers. Each square is smooth, soft, and bright, so perfectly even it seems less carved from food than printed by optimism. You press one gently, it bends without breaking. It is practical, obedient, and almost cheerful, which is a lot of personality for a square. Processed cheese becomes beloved because it solves very modern problems. It melts smoothly on hamburgers. It travels well. It fits lunchboxes. It lasts longer than many natural cheeses. It becomes a food of diners, wartime supply, family kitchens, school cafeterias, military packs, picnics, and late-night sandwiches assembled by people too tired to make better decisions. There is no need to pretend it is the same as an aged alpine wheel or a soft bloomy round. It is doing a different job. It is not singing an ancient ballad. It is humming under fluorescent lights while making toast more satisfying. Here is a quirky tidbit, for the softly absurd side of dairy history cheese in a spray can became a real product of the modern age. The very idea would probably confuse many ancestors who spent centuries pressing, salting, and aging milk, only for someone to eventually say, yes. But what if it came out with a hiss? Aerosol cheese is strange, playful, and deeply industrial. It turns cheese-like food into a party trick, a camping snack, a decoration, and an object of culinary side-eye. You can almost hear a medieval cheesemaker sighing into the void. Refrigeration also reshapes the story. You enter a cold storage room where the air touches your skin like clean winter. Fans hum in the ceiling. Metal shelves hold boxes, wheels, blocks, tubs, and cartons. The smell is muted by cold, but still they're cream, plastic, cardboard, salt, and faint rind. Artificial cold changes the geography of cheese. It no longer must live only where caves are damp enough or cellars are cool enough. It can move farther and wait longer. Trucks fitted with refrigeration carry dairy foods across countries. Supermarkets become chilled landscapes of abundance, and cheese becomes a wall of choices glowing beneath glass and plastic. In the supermarket aisle, you walk slowly past rows of packaged cheese, blocks of orange cheddar, pale Swiss slices, shredded mozzarella in bags, cream cheese in tubs, cottage cheese in cartons, string cheese wrapped for children, crumbled blue cheese in plastic cups, parmesan grated into green-lidded containers, imported wedges with elegant labels, local artisan rounds trying not to look intimidated. The atmosphere is cool, bright, and faintly impersonal. A cartwheel squeaks. A child asks for snacks. Someone reads a label with the seriousness of a diplomat negotiating peace. Cheese has become ordinary abundance. Colour becomes part of this industrial tale. Many people come to expect orange cheese, especially in parts of Britain and North America, because cheesemakers have long used colouring such as annatto to create a consistent golden hue. The practice began partly because milk colour changes with diet and season, especially when cows eat fresh grass rich in carotenoids. Colouring could make cheese appear richer or more uniform. In industrial food culture, this habit grows into expectation. You look at a bright orange slice and remember that its colour is not inevitable. It is tradition, marketing, and chemistry wearing a cheerful little coat. Factories also create new relationships between farmers and processors. Milk is collected from many farms and pooled together. This helps build large supply chains, but it can make individual pastures invisible. A farmer rises early, washes equipment, milks cows, and chills milk in a bulk tank. A truck arrives, connects a hose, and pulls the milk into a stainless compartment. The sound is hollow and liquid, a deep gulping through metal. The farmer's hands smell of iodine wash, hay, and animal warmth. By the time the milk becomes cheese, it may no longer carry that one farm's name. It becomes part of a brand, a system, a national flavour. War gives processed and industrial cheese another kind of importance. Durable dairy products can be shipped to soldiers and civilians. Cheese supplies calories, protein, fat, and comfort. In military food systems, taste is not always the first priority, as many soldiers throughout history could explain with haunted eyes. But a stable cheese product has value. It can survive transport, rationing, storage, and distribution. It can be eaten quickly. It can make plain bread less bleak. In difficult times, even an unglamorous slice may feel like a small mercy. Historians still argue whether industrial cheese mainly democratized an ancient food by making it affordable and available to millions, or whether it weakened regional craft by training people to prefer uniform, mild, convenient products. The answer is not simple. Both can be true. A factory block may feed a family on a budget. A processed slice may become part of childhood memory. A mass-market cheese may also push smaller makers aside or dull expectations of flavour. Convenience can nourish and flatten at the same time, which is very inconvenient for anyone seeking one tidy moral lesson. You step into a small artisan creamery operating in the shadow of this industrial world. It is not rejecting modern knowledge. There are thermometers, sanitation rules, cultures, drains, stainless tables, and careful records. Yet there are also wooden shelves, seasonal milk, hand-ladled curds, and rinds brushed with quiet devotion. The room smells stronger than the factory hay: butter, mushrooms, brine, and damp stone. You touch a young wheel and feel the slight give beneath its rind. Here, science and old craft do not glare at each other from opposite corners. They work together, sometimes awkwardly, like relatives at a long dinner. The modern cheese world becomes a wide spectrum. At one end, billions of slices are wrapped with astonishing speed. At another, a maker turns a few delicate rounds by hand. Between them are co-ops, regional plants, farmstead dairies, supermarket brands, protected appellations, immigrant cheesemakers, vegan experiments, lactose-free options, and chefs grating, melting, smoking, whipping, frying, and stretching cheese into forms both beautiful and frankly excessive. A mozzarella pull on a pizza becomes visual theatre. A cheeseburger becomes a global icon. Macaroni and cheese becomes comfort in a bowl, soft and golden as a lamp on a rainy evening. The sounds of the age gather around you, the churn of compressors, the hiss of sealed plastic, the beep of a checkout scanner, the rumble of refrigerated trucks, the quiet pop of a cheese wrapper opening in a kitchen at midnight. The smells are not only cellars and pastures now, they are toast, burgers, lunch trays, pizza ovens, cardboard boxes, and melted cheddar bubbling at the edge of a pan. Cheese has not stayed pure, if pure ever meant anything useful. It has stayed adaptable. You end the day in a small apartment kitchen, far from the fields yet still connected to them. Rain taps the window. The refrigerator hums. Your fingers peel back a wrapper, and a slice of cheese lies cool against your palm. Maybe it is processed. Maybe it is a wedge from a careful maker. Maybe it is shredded in a bag, waiting for soup, pasta, eggs, or bread. It is ordinary, almost too ordinary to notice. But inside that ordinariness is a huge modern machine of animals, farmers, scientists, factory workers, truck drivers, grocers, advertisers, regulators, cooks, and hungry people. The ancient food has entered fluorescent aisles and plastic packaging without completely losing its old purpose. It still stretches milk across time. It still turns abundance into storage. It still comforts the tired. The factory light dims. The refrigerator murmurs. Somewhere a wheel ages slowly. And somewhere a slice melts without ceremony over toast. Cheese has become global, convenient, mass-produced, and occasionally very orange. Yet it remains what it has always been at heart. Milk made useful, shaped by human desire, and ready to meet the appetite of its age. You find yourself in a present-day cheese shop just as evening begins to soften the street outside. Rain has recently passed, leaving the pavement dark and shining under the window lights. The door opens with a small bell, and the warmth inside meets you with a deep, layered smell: butter, hay, mushrooms, toasted nuts, salt, cream, cellar stone, and one powerful washed rind quietly announcing that subtlety is for cowards. The air is cooled from the display case, but the wooden counter feels smooth and warm beneath your hand. Behind the glass, and cheese rests in careful abundance, there are pale, bloomy rounds with rinds like velvet. There are hard, amber wedges crystalline with age. There are blue cheeses marbled like stormy skies. There are soft goat logs dusted with ash, fresh tubs of ricotta, brined blocks of feta, alpine wheels smelling faintly of roasted onions and grass, and small experimental cheeses decorated with herbs, flowers, charcoal, wine must, or bright orange cultures. Each one seems to whisper, very politely, that milk never had to be boring. You stand there as a cheesemonger cuts a sliver from a wedge and places it on paper. The knife gives a faint crackle as it passes through tiny crystals. You lift the piece to your mouth. It is cool, firm, and a little gritty at the edge. Then it melts slowly, releasing salt, sweetness, caramel, broth, grass, and a flavour that feels older than the room. Around you, traffic murmurs outside the window. A refrigerator hums. Someone asks whether a cheese is too strong, which is a brave question in a place where several wheels appear fully capable of answering back. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this quiet modern scene. Cheese remains one of the world's most enduring preserved foods, made across continents from cow, sheep, goat, buffalo, yak, camel, and other milks, using methods that range from hand-ladled farmstead craft to highly controlled industrial production. Its forms vary wildly, yet the basic transformation remains recognizable. Milk is guided by acid, enzymes, salt, pressure, microbes, time, and human intention. A bowl of fresh curd and an aged mountain wheel are distant relatives, but they still belong to the same old family gathering, with the usual range of personalities. You walk from the shop into a restaurant kitchen where cheese becomes motion. Mozzarella stretches in shining ribbons over hot dough. Parmesan falls like pale snow over pasta. Halloumi squeaks against a grill, browning at the edges with a salty, cheerful stubbornness. Paneer holds its shape in simmering sauce. Queso fresco crumbles over beans and corn. A blue cheese melts into cream, sending up a deep peppery aroma. The room is bright, hot, and loud with knives, pans, orders, steam, and the soft thud of a cook closing an oven door with one hip because both hands are busy. Cheese is now global in a way no ancient herder could have pictured. It sits on pizzas in cities far from Italy. It appears in tacos, sandwiches, pies, salads, dumplings, breads, pastries, soups, sauces, breakfast plates, street food, luxury menus, lunch boxes, and quiet midnight snacks eaten while standing in front of an open refrigerator. It can be sacred tradition, rural income, national pride, comfort food, culinary art, or simply the thing that makes potatoes more emotionally supportive. Its survival depends partly on usefulness, but also on pleasure. People keep making cheese because it works, and because it makes meals feel more complete. Yet the modern cheese world is not only abundance, it also faces questions. Dairy farming uses land, water, feed, labour, and energy. Animals must be cared for responsibly. Methane, climate change, pasture management, biodiversity, animal welfare, and rural livelihoods all press into the future of cheese. You step onto a small farm in the cool light of morning and feel dew soaking the grass around your shoes. Cows move slowly across pasture, their breath visible in the air. The smell is green, warm, and living. A farmer watches them with tired affection. Cheese begins here, not in a shop, but in weather, soil, animals, and work. Some makers respond by returning attention to place. They use rotational grazing, seasonal milk, native breeds, small batches, wooden tools, natural rinds, and local cultures. Others focus on precision, efficiency, reduced waste, improved safety, and lower environmental impact. Some explore plant-based and fermentation-based alternatives, trying to recreate the texture, melt, and flavour of cheese without traditional animal milk. The results vary from surprisingly pleasant to, well, educational. Humanity has always experimented with milk. Now it experiments with the idea of milk itself. Historians still argue whether the future of cheese will be shaped most by industrial innovation, place-based tradition, changing climate, consumer ethics, or the stubborn emotional power of familiar foods. The evidence points in several directions at once. People want authenticity, but also convenience. They want bold flavour, but also safety. They want tradition, but also new diets. They want the old cave and the online grocery cart, preferably with overnight delivery and a charming label. Cheese survives because it does not choose only one path. It spreads, bends, adapts, and somehow keeps its centre. That centre is transformation. You can see it in a fresh dairy room where milk still waits in a vat, quiet and pale. A cheesemaker adds culture, and the invisible work begins. The room smells of warm cream, clean cloth, and faint lemony acidity. The curd sets, tender as custard. It is cut into cubes, stirred, drained, salted, shaped, and carried to shelves. You touch the rind of a young cheese, and it feels soft, damp, and delicate. Weeks or months later, that same cheese may smell of mushrooms, nuts, earth, fruit, broth, or flowers. Nothing about it is rushed. Cheese is one of the rare foods that teaches patience without sounding preachy. Here is a quirky tidbit for the final little smile: cheese has been sent into space. Astronaut menus have included cheese products, and a wheel of cheese once travelled aboard a private spacecraft as a playful tribute to a comedy sketch. It is difficult not to admire a food that begins with animals grazing under the sky and eventually rides a rocket beyond it. Somewhere, the human story looked at preserved milk and thought, yes, this too should leave the planet. Very normal, very us. Back on Earth, cheese continues to collect meanings. A wedge on a wooden board can signal celebration. A grilled cheese sandwich can taste like childhood. A sharp crumble in a salad can feel sophisticated for about 8 seconds until it falls off the fork. A family recipe may depend on one specific cheese bought from one specific store by one specific person who insists the other brand is not the same. And honestly, they may be right. Taste is memory with a mouth. In mountain villages, coastal towns, desert markets, island farms, apartment kitchens, and city restaurants, cheese keeps changing hands. Someone turns a wheel in a cellar. Someone brines curds in a bucket. Someone stretches mozzarella while steam warms their face. Someone grates hard cheese over soup. Someone opens a lunchbox and finds a small wrapped stick of mild cheese. Perfectly ordinary and quietly adored. The scale changes. The tools change. The labels change. But the gesture remains intimate. You take milk, which cannot wait, and give it time. There is comfort in a food that never disappeared. Empires rose and cracked. Trade routes shifted. Languages changed. Religions spread. Cities burned and were rebuilt. Machines arrived. Refrigerators hummed into kitchens. Plastic wrapped the modern world in convenience and confusion. Through all of it, cheese remained stubbornly present, not unchanged. No food is unchanged, but continuous. It crossed boundaries by becoming useful wherever it landed. It made itself humble enough for workers and interesting enough for kings, monks, merchants, scientists, children, travellers, and sleepy people listening in the dark. You leave the cheese shop with a small package wrapped in paper. The rain has stopped completely. The street smells of wet stone, car tyres, bread from a nearby bakery, and night air cooling between buildings. The parcel is slightly cold in your hand. It has weight, but not much. Such a small thing to carry so much history. Inside is milk made solid, pasture made portable, time made edible. You walk slowly, hearing your footsteps blend with distant traffic, and the city seems gentler for a moment. And now the story begins to loosen, like a rind softening in candlelight. You set the little parcel on a quiet table. The room grows dim outside. The world keeps moving, but more softly now, as if wrapped in wool. You breathe in the faint scent of cream and salt, and let the long road of cheese fade into simple images: a grazing animal beneath morning mist, a clay bowl cooling near a hearth, a cellar shelf in patient darkness, a kitchen lamp glowing over bread. Nothing hurries, nothing needs to be solved. Milk becomes curd, curd becomes memory, memory becomes warmth, and warmth becomes sleep. The last sound is gentle, almost nothing at all, like a knife resting beside a wooden board, and the old food waits in silence, calm and familiar, ready for another day.